Drum patterns can seem like they should be the easiest part about making a beat, but as you know, one simple drum pattern mistake can easily ruin your entire beat. So today I want to share an easy to use 3-step framework that will help you make better drum patterns for your beats anytime you get stuck. And by using this simple framework, you will hopefully put an end to your drum pattern nightmares and get your beats sounding much better. And to show you these ideas, I'm going to be using some loops that you can actually download for free. If you want to follow along with what I'm going to be doing in this video, I've left a download link in the description box below. And do not worry, you're not going to get into any trouble. I'm the one that made these, so they are 100% royalty free and copyright free. Feel free to do whatever you want with them. My name is Navie. I've been producing for over 15 years now, and in that time, I've produced on some pretty cool projects like on hip hop songs, video game soundtracks, erotic films. That last one's a lie, but I still think what I'm about to show you will help you with your drum patterns. So let's start with the very first step to creating a good drum pattern: set a boundary. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, let's think of it like this. If you were stuck in the middle of a desert, do you think it would be easy to find your way out? Unless you're some badass Navy SEAL, you'd probably agree that this would be hard. You'd probably end up walking in circles and being lost forever. And for many producers, this is exactly what creating drum patterns for their beats can feel like. They spend hours and hours trying out different drum pattern ideas, not knowing what they're doing, where they're going, and what is right or wrong. But let's think about this differently. What if instead of being in a sea of sand, you were in a box of sand? Well, now life is a lot more fun and simple, at least until the police show up. But you get the idea. By setting a boundary, you can gain a sense of direction. You'll be able to make decisions now. So what does this look like when you're making a beat? You can gain direction with your drum pattern by just picking a genre to start with. And I already know the neckbeards are already typing their messages about how genres are meant to be broken and how doing this is not creative, all while trying to balance their fedoras on their heads. We're all very impressed by you. Look, I'm not saying that you must follow rules here. Instead, what I'm saying is that by setting a boundary, you can at least gain a sense of direction for your drum pattern. You can build a starting point. So let's see how this looks in a real life scenario. Here I will be using this loop from the pack, which again, you can download for free in the description box below. Now I'm going to start by setting a boundary here, and I'm going to decide which genre I want to build towards. So with this loop, I will decide on going towards a modern boom bap idea. So with that in mind, I will start by placing a kick on the 1 and a snare on the 2 and the 4. This is a great place to start for your drum patterns, no matter what kind of beat you're making. But notice the snares are slightly off the 2 and the 4 grid. Again, because I'm building within a boundary, this helps me decide which types of drum pattern techniques I should use and which ones I might want to avoid. For example, I could make an ultra complex drum pattern like this that's constantly changing throughout my entire loop. But I know with modern boom bap, there is a larger focus on drum repetition. Again, setting this boundary is giving me a direction for what kind of pattern I should make. Same thing with my hi-hat pattern here. I know that modern boom bap has less of an emphasis on the hi-hat, so I will make a pattern like this that is far less dense with quieter textures. And finally, drum fills and rolls are also common in modern boom bap, so let's go ahead and include some of those. Great, now at this point, I could experiment and maybe start breaking some of those rules, but by just setting a boundary at the beginning and deciding on a genre, I have enough direction to start. So that is number 1 on this list. Next up, let's talk about the second step in this framework, which is to fit the loop. Now, one of the strangest things that I see in the producer space are tools and plugins that spit out drum pattern ideas for you.
Oh my god, dude. Alright, I think we found the worst one so far. This is truly bad.
The reason why these often don't work in a real beat is because you need to fit your drum pattern to your loop. Different loops will require you to build your drum patterns differently. Let me show you what I mean by taking yet another loop from this pack. when creating a drum pattern for this loop, I need to start by thinking about what the loop is actually doing. One unique trait about this loop is that it's uneven. It has pockets where there is more going on and other pockets where there is less going on. You can even see this visually in the waveform. I'll play it again for you so you can hear. And this is gonna change how I create my drum pattern for this loop. So again, let's start with step number 1 and set a boundary. Here, I'm gonna create something Travis Scott-esque, something a little bit more trappy. But instead of going into autopilot and simply creating a normal trap hi-hat pattern like this, I'm gonna build something that fits a bit better. And again, I will do this by thinking about what's actually happening in my loop. So I will create more with my pattern during the times when my loop minimizes with this trap hi-hat roll, for example. But during the more dense part of my loop, I will create something that's a little bit more simple and minimal and create a sense of openness with my pattern. Next, I will introduce another layer of hi-hats for my drum pattern. Again, I know that using multiple hi-hats is common when working within a trap boundary. So that's step number 1. But step number 2, I will fit my actual pattern to what my loop is doing again. I'll create a pattern during the more minimal part of the loop, but again, notice I've created absolutely nothing during the more busy section of my loop. And then from here, I'll fill out the drum pattern a bit more using small percussive sounds and ideas, and I'll also create an 808 pattern. But since this is a drum pattern video, not an 808 video, I'll leave some of these tips for another time. Fundamentally, what I'm saying here is to focus on balance. If you have a complex loop, then it may be a better idea to create something a little bit more simple with your drum pattern and vice versa. And now for the final step, which is an important one. You can do everything right up to this point. You can nail steps 1 and 2 and still have your drum pattern sound bad if step 3 is not done well. You need to think about content versus character. This is a tricky one because it's an idea that newer producers often overlook. And the reason why is because it actually has less to do with the actual drum pattern and more to do with your drum selection. And the tricky part is that even if you build a perfect drum pattern, your actual pattern itself can still sound bad for this very reason. Let me show you what I mean by using this third loop here. So once again, I will do step 1 and set a boundary to a classic boom bap beat. And I'll do step number 2 and I'll tailor my actual pattern to fit my loop as well. So here, even though we have a classic boom bap hi-hat, kick, and snare pattern, all of which are fitting the loop, take a listen. This doesn't sound the best. So this is when you need to think about content versus character. Now, what does this actually mean? When choosing your drums, think of content as the actual useful portion of your drum sound. For example, the content portion of a kick is the part that actually creates that thump. It's the lower frequencies of that sound. So this is a kick that would be considered low in content, and this would be a kick considered higher in content. Notice how much more thump it has. Snares, hi-hats, every single drum sound has this exact idea. There are important qualities and characteristics about these particular sounds that help them be more of use in your beat. So that's content, but there's also the character portion of your sound. Now, what is that? Here is a kick that would be considered low in character, and here is a kick that's high in character. Basically, what I'm talking about is the idea of how much texture is this adding into your beat. And the common mistake I see many producers make is disregarding this completely and basing their sound selection purely on what sounds the most interesting in isolation, rather than what the beat actually needs. For example, if we go back and listen to this loop again, pay attention to how much instrumentation you can actually hear. Now let's compare this to the very first loop that we looked at. The very first loop here has a lot more character and texture within it. There are multiple different instruments, we have bells, we have a guitar, we have these vocals, and all of these sounds sit in many different spaces. But when we listen to this loop that we're working with now for this current beat, there's far less going on here. Most of this loop is driven by one kind of sound, so here it might be wise to build a drum pattern using sounds that have more character. So in this example, by doing this, we go from a drum pattern that makes the beat feel empty and lacking, to the exact same pattern, making the beat sound much more full and complete. All thanks to the actual textures themselves instead of the drum pattern. This is why I say your sounds can have a huge impact on how well the pattern is working. You need to pick the right sounds as well as build the right pattern. So those are the 3 steps that you can use the next time you're trying to build your own drum pattern. Number 1, set a boundary. This helps give you direction and a starting point. Number 2, fit the loop. Analyze what your loop is doing rather than just use stock patterns. And number 3, content versus character. Make sure you choose the right sounds for your beats. Otherwise, your drum pattern will sound incomplete no matter how good of a pattern you build. I hope this framework has helped. Again, if you like these loops, download them for free in the description box below. They are 100% royalty free, so feel free to use them as you wish. Like and subscribe while you're at it. And other than that, I will see you next time. Bye bye.